Hello, and a very warm welcome back to the Liz Earle Wellbeing Show. It is great to be back on the airwaves with my longer format Wellbeing Show here. Thank you for joining me. Now, today I am especially thrilled to be sharing this episode with you, as I have just had a fascinating chat with the NHS GP and Sunday Times bestselling author, Dr Rupy Aujla. Rupy works day to day in emergency medicine, super busy right now, obviously. But his experience in this field has led him to develop a real passion for preventative medicine, with a particular interest in the ways that eating well can transform our health. And following this interest, he enrolled for a master's in nutritional medicine and launched something called The Doctor's Kitchen, which you may well have heard of. This is where he has been sharing both his love of food and medicinal effects of eating well ever since. He's also the founding director of Culinary Medicine, a not-for-profit organisation which aims to equip our doctors with the nutritional know-how that is so often sadly lacking in their traditional training. Well, we had an insightful conversation about struggles with his own health led him to appreciate the power of nutrition, as well as the work that needs to be done to put food back on the menu at medical school. I am so looking forward to hearing your thoughts on this and more. So do please leave comments on Instagram after the show. And don't forget that if you'd like to watch our chat, you can now find full video podcasts over on the Liz Earle Wellbeing YouTube channel. Yes, you can. So without further ado, let's get right into the episode. So Rupy, thank you so much for hopping onto my podcast here. It's such a pleasure. I'm a genuine fan of your work and everything that you're doing.
I appreciate that. And the pleasure's mine, honestly. I've been listening to your podcast for a while, and your work's amazing. So yeah, it's an absolute privilege.
Oh, well, no, likewise. And I think, let's start off by talking a bit about your background, because it's unusual, I have to say, even in this day and age, to find a practicing medical doctor who is so into food and the value of food as medicine. What was your journey?
Oh, so my journey through food, I think, started when I was a kid. So I grew up in a Punjabi household. My mum was an exceptional cook. She introduced us not only to traditional Punjabi cuisine and Indian cuisine and the different elements of spice blending, but also other cultures, and that's how I learned about food. So we would have Italian food, American food, a whole bunch of different types of cuisine from Southeast Asia, and she'd be super experimental. And so my love of cooking really came from the environment that my mum essentially made for us growing up as kids. So I think from that perspective, it's quite unusual. And also my mum's quite, she features quite a bit in my story, actually. So my mum's quite a creative person. She's done law. She's investment banker in the 80s and 90s. Wow. She started her own graphic design agency. She's done property. She's done economics. She's done it all. And she still does stuff now. Like she builds chairs and she designs clothing and all this. Every time I go back home, she's doing something new. And the same, that sort of like creative curiosity she brought to food. And before I went to medical school, I had no idea how to cook myself because my mum was the one cooking for all of us at home. She was like, well, you need to learn how to cook, otherwise you're not going to be able to feed yourself. So she taught me 3 recipes, and one of which is the lemongrass Thai curry that I actually put in my first book with her permission. And when I got to medical school, everyone thought I was this exceptional cook because I could make this one dish.
That's what you turned out.
Yeah. And it had like everything like holy basil and galangal and coconut cream and, all these things that we didn't really have readily available on our supermarket shelves. And I was knocking this up in the middle of like halls in medical school. So I had to keep up this pretense of like being a good cook at med school, which is super interesting. But the journey through food as medicine and nutritional medicine and everything I talk about now really started when I was a junior doctor. So about 11 years ago now, when I qualified, I started suffering from atrial fibrillation, which for your listeners is an irregular heartbeat. And in my case, when my heartbeat was going very, very fast, 200 beats per minute sometimes. And
Wow.
these episodes, it's if I could describe the feeling, it's as if you're about to pass out and you've just like run a marathon back to back. It's a very odd feeling. And
what causes that? Do we know?
Yeah, so that was the start of my journey, really, because I was a 24-year-old with no pre-existing health issues, no issues in my family line, who suddenly just kept on going to these episodes lasting anywhere between 24 and 48 hours of just this irregular heartbeat. And so I saw some of the best practitioners, and I still see some of the best cardiologists in London and probably globally as well, who try to figure this out. So I had electrophysiology studies where they put a wire into the heart and look for any short circuiting, for want of a better term. I had all the blood tests you can imagine, looking at any issues with my electrolytes. I had cardiac MRIs, echocardiograms, 24-hour tapes, everything. And it was a clean bill of health. And, you know, there was nothing else that was asked about my diet, lifestyle and everything. But 3 months into the job of being a junior doctor, which is when I first started having these episodes, you can imagine late nights, critical learning skills, learning on the job, not sleeping properly, eating food from the hospital canteen. It was a huge shock going on that time. And I realized that, now I realize that my threshold for illness and the way it presented itself in my case was atrial fibrillation is a lot lower than my peers. And I had to be a lot more proactive, I guess, about my health. So yeah, that was the start of my journey. And to this day, there isn't really a trigger that's been found for me, but there are a number of different reasons why people might have that. Alcohol can be a trigger, certain medications. Sometimes you do have a re-entry pathway, which is an abnormality in the anatomy of the heart and the way the electricity is asynchronous, so it doesn't go in the correct path. There can be some structural issues as a result of a number of other procedures that somebody might have had. And we tend to see atrial fibrillation in an older population, which is why it's quite unusual. And sometimes you can have it as a result of infection. So some patients that we've had coming into intensive care because of COVID-19 have been found to have atrial fibrillation, and that can happen when you're suffering any type of infection.
So once you were aware of this health issue and the stresses of working as a junior doctor, how did you change your diet, or didn't you? Did you just go back to your mum and say, help, what can I eat now that's going to be good?
Yeah, so I actually ignored my mum's advice initially. So I was, a junior doctor, just came out of one of the most well-established medical schools in the world, and obviously I had the arrogance about me of, I know much more than my mum. She's not a medic, and if these hugely well-established cardiologists are telling me that I need to have an ablation, which is a procedure where you put a guide wire into the heart and you essentially burn an area of misfiring cells such that it doesn't cause that asynchrony in the way your heart beats, then I was definitely going to go for that. And there was no two wits about it. And at the time, the way we performed the procedures, you had to take an anticoagulant for a number of months prior to the procedure. And I was going to load myself up with warfarin. And I spoke to a whole bunch of my colleagues, and they were like, yeah, absolutely, you should definitely do that. It's, you're a very good candidate. You're young. You don't have any weight issues. You don't have any pre-existing problems. It's going to be a quick procedure and it'll be fine. And for a lot of people it is. I have to hasten to add that. But my mum was like, you need to sort out your diet and lifestyle before you entertain more any more interventions that could potentially bring you harm. And so really, to appease my mum, I told my cardiologist.
Always a good plan.
Yeah. To appease my mom, I told my cardiologist, I asked them actually, I said, look, would I have your blessing if I was to take the medication that I was on? I was on bisoprolol and flecainide, so an antiarrhythmic and a beta blocker. So if I maintain taking the medications and I try some changes for about 6 months or so, would that be okay? And they said, look, that's fine, but you will need this ablation, and the earlier you do it, the better, because you can go into what's called persistent AF, where the episodes are constantly there rather than 2 to 3 times per week, which is what I was suffering from. So I took a very back to basics approach. I had no idea where to start. As I'm sure a lot of your listeners might be aware now, at medical school, we're just not taught nutrition. We're not taught, the value of lifestyle up until this point. We can talk about that later if you like. And so, I just went through first principles. Out went cereal for breakfast. In came nuts and vegetables and leftovers from the night before. I never used to eat at the hospital canteen and those soggy sandwiches anymore. I'd always bring my dark green leafy vegetables and all the leftover cooked. I basically applied what I knew about cooking to healthy cooking and just increased my plant consumption. I started having a lot more fiber in my diet. I was nicknamed Tupperware Boy by my consultant because I'd always come in with my Tupperware.
Tupperware, brilliant.
Yeah. And the other thing is, there are a few other intangible aspects. So I never gave up being a doctor. I wasn't going to allow a condition to frustratingly put my career on the back burner. I started optimizing my sleep as much as possible because I knew I could recognize that these were triggers, and the stress was definitely a trigger. So I started meditation again, something that my parents taught me when I was a teenager, when I was doing my GCSEs. So it was this whole collection of different elements of things that I did, one after the other, that probably resulted in me reverting my condition. And so my condition went from 2 to 3 times per week. I was having these AF episodes to 0 within about a year and a half.
That's incredible. And what did your cardiologist say? Because they were obviously waiting for you to ring up and book yourself in for surgery.
Yeah. So it was quite an embarrassing situation because I actually didn't want to admit to them all the quirky things I was doing. And it seems a bit strange now looking back on it, but at the time, you got to think, like, even me starting the doctor's kitchen was quite cavalier. A doctor talking about food as medicine, a doctor talking about nutrition, and talking about the other sort of like softer science subjects as they're traditionally known. And so back in 2010, it was kind of I just didn't feel that I had the authority as a junior doctor to say, I've done all these different things. This is what I think is going on, to a cardiologist that was telling me literally like, 12 months before, you're going to need to have this procedure. Otherwise, just go, yeah, exactly. It could be really harmful, which completely within their right to do. And they should definitely take that stance. But I think we're becoming a lot more appreciative of the science behind other things now. And so with that in mind, when I said that these are my ECGs, I'm not having any episodes anymore, they put it down to what we call spontaneous remission.
Miraculous recovery.
Yeah, exactly. Which it's funny. I don't know if you've spoken to him yet, but Dr. Jeffrey Redinger studied this at Harvard School of Medicine, all these different spontaneous remissions, and actually looked at the patterns of people who have these spontaneous remissions, quote unquote. And there seem to be a lot of similarities there. So there's something in all the different things that I was doing intuitively, and the result that I had, and that's something I'm dedicating the rest of my life to studying and sharing with people. But a period of quiescence, I think that was the term they used for my atrial fibrillation. I keep on going back and haven't had any episodes, and these are my ECGs and these are my bloods and stuff.
So at what point did you come clean, or have you never said?
I think they're pretty much aware now, given that they've seen my books.
Yeah.
And they've probably read my story. And I think a lot more cardiologists in general, I think, are coming round to the idea of all these a number of different factors that we've traditionally put to the wayside. Things like
Yes.
stress, actually, which is, quite an intangible concept. And, everyone's stressed. And whenever I inquire about stress, I never use that word because it's such a huge umbrella term that can mean multiple things for different people. I instead inquire about, the symptoms, sleep disruption, or vague symptoms of brain fog or fatigue, or, any things like that could be subtle. Because I actually find in clinical practice, people, not everyone, but people are generally unwilling to come forward and actually say, I am stressed and I think I need help from that point of view, because it's almost seen like a sign of weakness, which I think we need to reestablish a relationship with, because we're all stressed.
Oh gosh, yeah, never more so.
Absolutely.
Which in a way, perversely, it does put the focus back on support for the immune system, prioritizing sleep, eating better. I think, maybe if we look back to the very first lockdown, everybody got into home baking. The supermarket shelves were just cleared of flour and sugar, and everyone was baking banana bread. And I think as time has moved on, we've realized that that's not ultimately going to be that helpful. What do you find in terms of this, particularly looking from the heart perspective, but also more generally, how, it's been always fat was demonized. And now we're realizing that there's much more of a link with sugar in terms of our immune system, refined carbs, even cardiologists now talking about the goodness of good fats and the perils of refined carbs and sugars. What's your view on that? What's your take, both personally as somebody who's obviously very personally invested in cardiac matters, but also more generally with your work?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think the way to approach these sorts of subjects is remind ourselves of our inherent bias towards being binary. We love to have a sort of silver bullet for things. If you just get rid of fat, you'll be fine. If you just get rid of sugar, you'll be fine. And really, there is so much nuance to the subject of nutritional science. And that's before we even talk about how we need to personalize it to the person in front of you. So with the sugar debate, if you want to call it that, there are clear issues with refined sugars in our diets. And it kind of frustrates me when people argue back against that. Sugar is pervasive in most of the products that you see in supermarket shelves, including the healthy supermarkets and the healthier junk food that's marketed to us as unrefined or whatever. The same thing happens, the same biochemical issues and impact on our physiology occurs with refined sugars, whether they're natural or from maple syrup, etc.
It doesn't really matter whether you're eating a date ball or a Mars bar. Once it's in your
honestly,
body,
it will have
sugars.
the same effect. I had patients who wear continuous glucose monitors, and some people, even with oats, and I'm a big fan of oats, don't get me wrong, but even with oats, they'll see a huge spike in their glucose go up with oats. And, it depends on the type of oat. Is this an instant oat? Is it a flavored oat? The same thing with yogurt. Yogurts is a lot of fat, but if you're having a flavored yogurt, then that's going to have a lot of refined sugars in as well. So even the healthier marketed items are going to be problematic for certain people. So my thing about the sugars is, yes, we have way too much refined sugar in our diet, and actually removing as many different types of sugars that don't need to be in food would be a good pragmatic strategy for a lot of people, because sugar is hidden in everything. With fat, it's the same thing applies, because it's not fat per se. Fat is a very important macronutrient. It's the quality of the fat. And that's why one of my principles of healthy eating is quality fat. So the fats that you find in nuts and seeds are demonized to the same extent as fats that you'll find in fried foods, or, or like, meats that have been barbecued or taken to super high temperatures, or, refined in a burger with all the other stuff that you add in it. And there's also something to be said about that combination of refined fat with poor quality fat and refined sugars. This toxic blend of those two that you'll find perfectly arranged in Western food or the SAD diet, the standard American diet, is uniformly disastrous for people of all backgrounds, particularly those from African and Indian backgrounds. And that's why I'm very vocal about the subject, because I think the propensity toward cardiovascular problems disproportionately affects us, and we need to be a lot more vocal about this. And I see what my parents' friends eat, and a whole bunch of different friends and their parents and stuff, and it just makes me a bit angry that we're not being a lot more vocal about this as we should be. So my approach when it comes to sugar and fat is look at where sugar is necessary in terms of, heightening the flavor of a meal, but not something that you have every single day, like a sugary breakfast or a donut or a croissant or whatever. Those are luxury items. They're not staples. And the same thing I would apply to bread as well. Bread, yes, can be a great addition to your diet, but not something that you will want to have every single day if you are at risk of metabolic conditions. And a lot of patients that I see, unfortunately, do have those issues. And the same thing with fats. So fats, you want to look at quality fats, not the refined oils that we have littered across our supermarket. It's the ones that we have in their whole form. So nuts, seeds, and cold pressed oils, I think, are a good addition to the diet.
You talk about metabolic disorders and these different communities. Is that why the ethnic communities are more at risk with COVID of having more severe symptoms, do you think? Does the metabolic syndrome play into that?
There's a number of different hypotheses actually as toward that. So we know that most definitely obesity and issues with sugar regulation are probably to blame for why people from those minority groups are disproportionately affected. There is also a potential genetic component as well that I haven't fully researched, but I'm sure I wouldn't be surprised if there is something like that. Yeah. And also, unfortunately, those minority groups are going to be in poorer communities where they don't have access to healthy foods that could be protective. And so I like to look at it from two sides of the story. It's not just because we're more likely to have these conditions and that gives us more risk. We're less likely to have access to the healthy foods or the healthy environments, the healthy lifestyles that actually protect us as well. So, I think there's definitely nuance to that conversation, but we certainly have to be a lot more open about the likelihood of obesity being a factor. And with the whole obesity argument, I think perhaps the way it's been described on the news can be quite alienating for people, because obesity is one of the most complicated issues, and it's not just simply a calories in, calories out paradigm that really frustrates me, and it's still pervasive in nutritional science today. It has to be one that appreciates the complex mechanisms behind obesity. Genetics has involved, environment has an involvement, our food supply and our food environment, absolutely. So, there are a whole bunch of issues when it comes to obesity. It's not just this person's eating too much and they've brought it on themselves. It's extremely frustrating.
Yeah, I definitely agree. The Doctor's Kitchen, which you started, how long ago now?
About 5 years ago now.
5 years ago, gosh. Yeah. I mean, it's just become so well established, it almost feels longer. What was your first venture with that? Did you start it with a book? Did you start it with a podcast? How did it happen?
Yeah, the Doctor's Kitchen was a real passion project, and it still is. I still see it as a passion project. I had the idea of the Doctor's Kitchen midway through my general practice training back in 2012, and it took me 3 years before I mustered the confidence to actually talk about it with some of my colleagues, both senior and junior, and B, get behind a camera and actually start some videos. And the idea came to me when I saw a patient, and he came into my consulting room, and I'd been doing a lot of research and for my own issues, and talked to him about why he was at risk of metabolic disease and what the ramifications of that were, and why just changing his breakfast as a singular thing to do might be a very good start for him. And as he left, I taught him how to make oats. As he left, he asked me the simplest question that I just assumed he knew how to do, which was to make some oats. And I was talking to him about toppings. I literally talked I was thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead for this person in front of me. And that's when the penny dropped. It was like, people don't know the basics of cooking and why they should be cooking from scratch. And that's when the Doctor's Kitchen was born in my head. It was a platform where I create recipes, I talk about the clinical research behind the ingredients I use in an effort to inspire everybody about not only the functional benefits of food, but also the beauty of food. There's so many intangible benefits to sitting around a table, regardless of what you're eating, and slowing it down, you know? So
it's such a win-win, isn't it, on every level? I mean, making a bowl of simple porridge in the morning is really cheap. It's really healthy and beneficial, and it's very mindful, that process of stirring and creating and nourishing. I mean, nothing gives me greater pleasure than when I have people sitting around a table and I've created something and I serve it to them and they enjoy it. And the fact that it's fueling their bodies as well. I mean, there is literally nothing not to love, is there?
Yeah.
I can use a double negative. What are your feelings on going very low carb? I mean, I'm very interested in this whole thing. I did an experiment not that long ago when I went keto. And there's obviously, research going way back and looking at children with autism or various spectrum disorders. You've got Atkins talking about just eating fat basically and nothing else. What are your views as a doctor and as somebody who's obviously looked at this in some detail?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting space. I've actually done a series of podcasts on it that I'm yet to release. One with a registered dietitian. That's one of the only dietitians that prescribes a ketogenic diet for the use in refractory epilepsy. So it's treatment refractory epilepsy, where the drugs have failed and we have to entertain different mechanisms of trying to get it under control. And I also interviewed the parent of a child who has been put on a ketogenic diet for the last year and has come off all but one medication. So there is so much benefit, I think, that is yet to be revealed of a very low carbohydrate diet, one that induces nutritional ketosis, which is where instead of utilizing carbohydrates from food, you essentially utilize ketones from fat bodies to generate energy. And your liver has an incredible mechanism for maintaining your glucose levels, because glucose is the most important fuel in your body. And that's why we have these mechanisms to endure starvation mode. We wouldn't have had access to food 24 hours a day as we do now, which is a new phenomena. So we have to have had this machinery in us. And I think to your point about going on keto and seeing what the benefits potentially are, I actually think, yes, that there is some benefit in enduring some restriction, if I can use that word, where you actually utilize some of the machinery that's built in all of us for some functional benefits. I've talked about this in a lot more detail, but I'll just talk about two things. One is that it induces a process called autophagy. Autophagy is, I'm going to be very vague about this, but it's essentially where you recycle old elements of cells that are either dysfunctional or getting on a bit, and utilize them and package them into new cells. So it's essentially clearing up dysfunctional cells for the production of new ones. And that stimulates stem cells as well. And the other thing is there is some benefit in maintaining insulin sensitivity. So that's sensitivity to one of the most important anabolic hormones in your body, and that's insulin. So if you're barraging yourself with sugar all day long, 3 times a day, which a lot of us unfortunately are doing, unawares to this, you're having to utilize greater amounts of insulin in your body. Your body's having to produce greater amounts of insulin in your body to have the same desired effect, which is to package sugar back into either muscle cells, your liver, or fat cells, to maintain a stable level of blood sugar. You don't want your blood sugar to go too high. And so periods of fasting or a ketogenic diet, which is very low carbohydrate, can be useful in sensitizing against insulin. There are a whole bunch of other benefits as well. We can go to histone deacetylases and genomic effects and all the rest of it. But those are the two main things that I pick out from. Do I think a ketogenic diet long term is useful for people who don't need it for therapeutic benefits? People who might be suffering with refractory epilepsy or chronic migraines or pain. I don't think those benefits have been shown out yet, and there aren't any long-term studies to show that. And I think pragmatically, it's probably not one of the best diets, I would say, given that we are living for a lot longer these days. And I think that there are some negatives that we're yet to find out about. So I think, yeah, as almost like a cyclical thing, it could yield some benefits. But I tend to do a gentle fast every now and then. And that's where I skip breakfast.
I was going to ask you about that because okay. So so you skip breakfast, did you say?
Every now and then, every now and then. So if, for example, I'm doing an early shift and I have to leave, leave my place at 6 a.m. in the morning, I'm not going to rush breakfast at like 5:30. I'm just going to gently not eat for the morning and then break my fast, quote unquote, at midday. And I think that's a really intuitive way of eating that works for me, and it appeals for my convenience. One of my bosses in A&E actually does 5-2 every now and then, and he finds the days where he does, just for listeners, it's the 5-2 is where you eat normally essentially for 5 days, and you have 2 days where you have sub 800 or sub 500 calories, which is like one meal a day or something. And he actually finds the days when he works is when he likes to do the 2 days, i.e. the sub 800 calorie days, because he doesn't have to think about, getting his sandwich or getting whatever food that he can muster during a shift. So I think there are some really interesting intuitive ways to do it. The other thing I think is it's almost pertinent to say, given that we're seeing a rise in an unhealthy obsession with healthy eating, and people who are falling foul of eating disorders, and I see that even in A&E these days. This isn't for everyone, and I certainly don't recommend people who may not even recognize in themselves that they might have an issue with healthy eating or eating in general to entertain these sorts of practices. So it really has to be personalized, but that's definitely something that works for me, and I feel that it has therapeutic value.
Yeah, really interesting. No, I mean, when I did it for about 6 weeks. Now, what I noticed when I was eating in that way is that nothing I had came out of it. So this is really bad news, isn't it, for the processed food industry? If we talk about reducing refined carbs, lowering sugars, cooking from scratch, all the great things that you talk about, how are they going to make money out of us?
Yeah, well, I think they've always got
silence.
They've always got interesting ways of formulating according to what the current bodies say. So if you take the whole low fat movement, for example, as soon as it was established that fat was bad by the relevant authorities, they decided to reformulate and remove everything and just bung a load of sugar in, because when you take out fat, you take out taste. And so they have a way of mimicking what the current state of play or the current mindset is of the consumer. And right now what we're seeing is health. And so if you could brand your package in some natural mahogany colors and put unrefined on things and a number of different things like that, and repackage it as something healthy, and that's what the consumer wants, but it doesn't generally mean that it is healthy. It's the same thing with the 5 a day campaign. Spaghetti has been shown to contain 1 or 2 of your 5 a day, which is wholly inaccurate because it goes against the ethos of what the 5 a day campaign was about. And so I think the way we're going to change what we see on the shelves is if we become a lot more conscious, pragmatic consumers ourselves. We really need to educate ourselves. And this is why, you do what you do and I do what I do with the Doctor's Kitchen, because unless you change people's education around the subject matter, you will not change the food landscape. You can legislate as much as you want. It's not going to happen. You have to start with education. If I didn't educate myself, I'd be none the wiser. I'd still be a regular practitioner, and there's nothing wrong with that, but a regular practitioner who thought more of pharmaceuticals than the simple tools that we have within our locus of control as patients. And we're all patients, regardless of whether you like it, whether you like to think of yourself of that or not. But to your point about the refined carbohydrates and stuff, it is around 80% of the things that we find on supermarket shelves, which is hugely worrying. And in an era where we're experiencing political unrest with Brexit and everything else, I do worry. And that's why instead of looking at the supermarkets, I want to focus on education, educating doctors, educating children, educating the general public. That's how we make real change.
One of the things I really admire you for is exactly that, is your work educating doctors. Talk about the culinary medicine that you're doing, your work with your colleagues.
Yeah, so after I started the Doctor's Kitchen in 2015, Instagram and social media and stuff, and then a book came along, and I was writing the book, and I remember just thinking, I don't want to be the only person talking about this. I want to inspire and motivate my colleagues to be part of the herd, part of the pack. And I looked across the pond to what America was doing, which is quite ironic considering their obesity issues. And they had started culinary medicine back in 2009. It was Tulane Medical School and a whole bunch of other medical schools that are pretty prominent. And they started teaching not only the foundations of nutrition to their medical students, but also teaching them how to cook in a culinary school. And I remember flying over there to meet one of the pioneers of culinary medicine in the States. And I just said to him, look, I want to do what you're doing in the UK. And he said, well, you just need to start and just go to medical schools and just do it. And I did exactly that. I put out a call on social media one Sunday. I said, look, this is what I want to create. I want this to be collaborative across registered dietitians, across professional chefs, as well as doctors. I eventually want to take it to nursing and all allied health professionals as well. And we created a course in the UK, which is currently in Bristol Medical School, and now as part of compulsory medical education at UCL Medical School, which is an incredible university. And we literally teach the medical students, year 5 and around that as well, how to cook as well as the foundations of nutrition. And it's honestly, Liz, I want you to come and visit when we start opening the kitchen back up, because everything's remote. But the vibe in the kitchen is incredible, because you've got doctors talking to culinary students, talking to registered dietitians. We base everything we cook around a clinical case. So Mr. X comes in, 42-year-old, these are his blood pressure medications, this is what he's eating, this is his lifestyle, what is the one thing that you would change? How are you going to motivate this person in 8 minutes? That's all you've got. And, you know, it's just a newfound appreciation from these young, impressionable medical students that haven't been tainted by, you know, pharma and, you know, just prescribing drugs all day long. They still have that energy and that lust for helping patients that, you know, unfortunately, as you progress through your medical career, can get lost if you're not excited about it. So I just think it's a fantastic thing that we're doing. It's a non-profit, and we're gaining a lot more traction across other medical schools. And the aim is to get this as compulsory across all medical schools in the country and beyond.
That's so fantastic. I had no idea that it was just really growing in that way, and that you were actually literally treating food as medicine, you know, taking it with a case study. And how do we fix this person by what's going on their plate?
Absolutely. And, you know, the good thing is that we're making it as realistic as possible, right? So it's not like we're just recommending a kale salad to whoever comes through the door. We're personalizing it to the person in front of them. We talk about their cultural heritage. We talk about the fact that they might be food insecure. What if they've only got access to food banks? What if they've only got access to, you know, the least nutritious food? How do you actually make a meal out of what you find in food stores? So, you know, we try and offer all angles, because as an NHS practitioner who still works in A&E and general practice, you know, I'm privy to different people from different backgrounds, and you can't take a uniform approach, very much like what we do at a government and political level to food. Like, this is the food plate, this is what you should be eating, or this is how many carbohydrates everyone in the country should be eating. It's complete nonsense. It doesn't work like that for the person in front of you. So yeah, I think it's, you know, it's great for me to see that other people are just as passionate about this. And the more we grow, I think the more we can actually educate at a ground level, and not just doctors, but also nursing. Anyone who has contact with patients really should be educated in the basics of nutrition and how to make simple changes toward a healthier lifestyle.
And talking of contact with patients, you're obviously still very much working on the front line in the NHS. and you're obviously fully involved in COVID and have been, extraordinarily, stretched with that. How are you personally protecting your own immune system? What are you doing? Have you made any changes to better support your own immunity through food?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I already have a basic level of how I like to eat, and that's plant focused, lots of fiber, plenty of colors, and I've maintained that to a T, actually. And I think that's a good foundation. The other thing is concentrating on sleep. So I think sleep is a really strong foundation onto which to build immunonutrition. So I wear an Oura ring. I'm pretty religious about the number of hours I get, and whenever I see that, I might have only had 6 hours, I know not to push myself that day. So I won't exert myself with a high intensity interval training exercise. I won't go for a long run. I'll actually relax, and I'll make sure I go to sleep earlier that day. So that's one of the things. I do take a vitamin D3 supplement. I tend to take that throughout the year because of my darker skin tone and the fact that I have had low vitamin D in the past.
So how much do you take?
I take 2,000 IU a day. Yeah, which is double what the recommendations are, I believe. I also take omega-3 as a supplement, and vitamin B complex as well, because I'm predominantly plant-based, but a lot of us are B12 deficient. I also have been doing a ginger and turmeric broth that I really like it. So it tastes genuinely amazing. I basically blend up the ginger and turmeric, which is fresh. I get it from a supplier, and I put it in warm water or boiling water, quite like a rolling boil, let's say, for about 10 minutes, and I let it steep, and then I drain it out, and I put that in the fridge, and I'll probably have like 2 shots of that every single day. Whether or not that's going to have an impact on my propensity of getting an illness, I literally have no idea, but it makes me feel a lot better. So I'm definitely doing that. I haven't started taking vitamin C tablets because I haven't seen too much evidence with the 1 gram. I've only seen it with like super high levels, which are quite hard to get. So we're talking like above 10 grams. And I think I've experimented that before, and it gave me a bit of a tummy ache, so I've decided not to take it. But I get a lot of fresh vitamin C from my food anyway, which is pretty colourful. And other than that, the other thing that springs to mind is zinc. And zinc has been shown for the common cold to very marginally reduce the duration and severity of illness, and that's just with normal RSV. But I haven't seen too much with COVID. The thinking is that it's an ionophore, so it actually transports things across the cell membrane. So if you're taking vitamin C, for example, it's that combination that makes it a little bit more effective when it comes to preventing viral replication within the cell. But I haven't started taking that myself. I know colleagues that have done that, medical colleagues, but I personally haven't done that.
Yeah, interesting. Your book, 321, I have to say, is just such a good read. And, to be honest, when I get a new book that crosses my desk, it's almost like a bit of a sigh, another one. And what can this person possibly be saying that's new or interesting? And, and actually it is brilliantly written, brilliantly put together, and so very relevant, I think, now. And I love the way that you described 321. Do you want to say exactly what 321 actually means in the book?
Yeah. Well, first of all, that coming from you, Liz, that honestly, it means so much. Really, really does. Because I can imagine how many books cross your desk. But 321 is essentially the formula that we use for all Doctor's Kitchen meals now. It's 3 portions of fruit and vegetables per person, 2 servings per recipe, and only using 1 pan. So it's curries, tray bake stews, casseroles, all the sort of easy comfort food. And the reason why 321 is because we need to increase fruit and vegetable consumption. If there's one thing that I want people to take away, is more fruits and vegetables. It has a dose effect on your lower propensity or risk of cancer, autoimmune conditions, diabetes, metabolic issues. That's the simplest strategy that we have. 2 portions, you can double it, you feed a family of 4, or have your food for lunch the next day, and 1 pan because it saves on the washing up. And it
Love that.
It just makes it so much easier. Like, at the end of the day, at the end of a long shift, for example, the last thing I want to do is, toast nuts here and do all this, even if it takes 20 minutes or 30 minutes, the stress of that is so much. If it's just in 1 pan, everything is fluid and easy going, and it's just simpler. That's how I like to cook. So yeah, I'm so glad you liked it.
I genuinely love it. I'm actually going to buy a second copy because I've got one of my kids at uni. And again, 1 pan cooking, that's as far as it goes, really, partly because they don't have the facilities. If you're eating in halls, you'll remember from your medical school days, you don't have the luxury of big kitchens, and even people living, in small cramped cooking conditions. Even if I can imagine, if you're camping or you're on the run or whatever, you've literally just got that one hob going, and you can create the most extraordinary dishes. And I think it must be, testament to your mother perhaps here, and the flavors and the way that you put things together. Everything just looks so delicious. It doesn't feel that it's, I'm cooking this because it's good for me. I'm cooking it because it is the recipe that I want to go to create great flavor and great taste.
I'm so glad you said that, because, flavor and function is my motto in the kitchen. You can't just eat for functional benefits because it's bland, it's boring, and you can't establish a habit. And you've got to pay homage to where the dishes come from, and the flavorful intangible benefits that we spoke about earlier of the enjoyment of food, the pleasure of food. It's just so important in today's day and age, because we don't just want to eat because we want to protect our immune system and prevent cancer and do everything we can to prevent all these issues. We want a big hug from our food, especially right now.
Love it. Yeah.
We need a big hug.
Yeah, totally. We totally do. Before we go, I just wanted to pick up on something which I also really loved, and I've never seen it written anywhere else in any other book or in any other kind of piece of content. And when you were doing the acknowledgements at the back, your last bit, and this resonates with me, particularly for reasons you'll probably understand, is you say, I also want to thank myself. Having gone through the long list of your mum, your dad, your sister, your closest friends, your Culinary Medicine UK, your scientists, your patients, etc. And then it says, I also want to thank myself. I know that sounds incredibly narcissistic, but I'm the type of person who suffers classic imposter syndrome, and I'm plagued with self-doubt. Is that really so?
That's so. I'm very impressed that you read the whole book to the end and you picked up
right to the last line, Rupy.
I know, because I wasn't expecting anyone to pick up on that. That is me, 100%. I'm so glad it resonates with you, because it makes me feel like I'm not on my own in this. But yeah, I am massively plagued with self-doubt, massively. When you learn more, when you're experienced and immersed in this industry even more, you realize how little you know. And that's why I will never regard myself as an expert in anything, because the more you learn, the more you realize there is just a wealth of information, and you have to be settled with that. And actually, when you surrender to that, it's very comforting. It really is.
Yeah, I think staying humble, realizing, as you say, the more you know, the more you realize what you don't know.
Yeah.
And it's a mistake to think otherwise. Well, you clearly know a huge amount, and I'm so grateful to have you here. Your book 321 is just out, and I wish you massive success with it. You certainly deserve all the glory, and thank you for being with me. You're definitely not an imposter.
My pleasure, Liz.
And that is it for today's episode. And as always, you will find all the links and resources mentioned on today's show over on lizearlewellbeing.com. And there you can sign up for my free weekly newsletters packed with delicious and nutritious recipes. Very appropriate after today's chat. And I'd just like to say a huge and heartfelt thank you to all of you who have left us such lovely reviews, especially on iTunes, and so many 5-star ratings too. Thank you. These really do help others to find the show, and they get us noticed above all the other noise out there. So if you have enjoyed today's broadcast, I would love it if you could take just a moment to click on those 5 little stars at the end of the episode. Well, until the next time we chat, take good care. Go well. Bye-bye. The Liz Earle Wellbeing Show is presented by me, Liz Earle, with production by Amaryllis Earle and Harry Trevithick at Heart Dialogue, with thanks to my producer, Ellie Smith, and guest booker, Millie de la Morinière.